By this point, it has almost become a ritual to shit on anything new that Apple releases. Literally anything Apple will do, no matter how big or small, people will flock together and hate it because it's cool and because it gets the clicks. That is just the nature of reporting. Negative things tend to perform much better than positive things. When was the last time you heard good news on a news channel? Exactly. Something similar happened when the action button was released. People deliberately decided to be dismissive and dunk on its debut. It almost boggles my mind as to how can someone reject an idea which has not even taken shape fully. In my research for this video, I went across the tweets that were posted around the time when the action button was released, and it was kind of amusing to go through them. This is what I found. Cut to now, almost 2 years later, and the script has been completely flipped. Now we see content about how great the action button is, and I'm all for it. I'm really happy to see the action button get its recognition, finally. But that leaves us with one very important question. As a viewer, as a user, where do you start? Well, you can start right here. But fair warning, this is not a tutorial video. I'm not going to be showing you a step-by-step approach on how to implement different shortcuts into the action button. If I did that, that would be a very long video. I might cover that in a different video of itself. But for now, we're going to zoom out a little bit and explore the different mindsets with which one can approach the action button. I'm going to provide you with 4 different approaches that you can take to customize the action button. And as we progress through each approach, we will slowly climb the ladder of complexity. And in the end, you can decide which approach suits you best. So, here is the general idea. I want you to imagine a graph with the x-axis representing the level of functionality and the y-axis representing the level of complexity. Usually, as things get more functional, their complexity tends to increase alongside as well. And in the case of the action button, things can get as complex as you want them to. You can be this ultimate Iron Man kind of a person doing all sorts of complex and cool things at just the push of a button. Or you can choose to sit back, relax a little, and choose consistency over customizability. Ultimately, you have to decide what is a good fit for you and how much of a trade-off are you willing to accept between the level of functionality and the level of complexity. Oh, and towards the end of the video, I have a tiny gem for you that I found while researching for this video in the form of a tweet from a guy who posted a very good idea about how the action button could have been implemented. So stick around for that. Alright, let's start at the basics. I'm calling this approach the bare bones approach. In this approach, you don't really want to tinker around a lot. You just want to use your phone as it came. You don't care much for customizability, and all you want is your phone to function the way it has for so many years. And I respect that. If you're in this camp, most likely your action button is mapped to the silent switch. You're a person of consistency and you don't want things to constantly change. But even in this minimalist approach, I think you could make one tiny tweak and squeeze more out of your action button while making your phone all the more accessible. See, the problem with having the mute switch linked to the action button is that you don't really know when it is on and when it isn't. You really have a tiny visual feedback in the status bar, which you really have to squint to figure it out. If you ask me, I think it is much better to have the mute switch on the lock screen rather than the action button because it has a much better visual feedback. You can easily see whether it's on or not in just a glance. Just look at the difference between the visual feedback of the status bar versus the lock screen. It is day and night. So even in this minimalist approach, at the very least, I would suggest you move the silence functionality to the lock screen and use the action button for literally anything else. This was level 1. Okay, with that out of the way, let us move to a slightly more advanced approach. I'm calling this approach functional frenzy. If you're in this camp, you already know that the action button can be mapped to multiple actions. You can create a folder of actions that you really like, and you can have the action button mapped to that folder. So essentially now you have 8 actions instead of 1. As a person identifying with the functional frenzy camp, you're able to manage a bit more complexity. So you push in a little more functionality into the action button and squeeze a little more juice out of it. Things are already looking promising at this level, but they are about to get a whole lot spicier. What if I told you could go one level higher? Instead of having 8 actions, you could have 64. Welcome to the tricky tweaker level. No, seriously. The potential is unlimited at this stage. So basically, for each individual action, you can also have sub-actions, essentially giving you a pool of, well, unlimited options. But of course, to maintain your sanity and mine, let us assume that each action will have 8 further sub-actions. This brings up your total to 64 possible things you can do at just the press of a button. If you think this is a lot, you probably want to sit down for the next one. Okay, so the final boss. Are you ready? This one is sort of a wild card because it uses focus modes to change how your action button behaves in different situations. I'm calling this funky focus. Now imagine if we combine this logic with any of the previous three approaches. For example, let's combine funky focus and tricky tweaker. In the tricky tweaker approach, we have already seen that you could have a potential of 64 actions, but you could also bring the focus mode into the mix. You could link what the action button does based on the focus mode. And I think it is safe to assume that most of us have at least 4 focus modes, right? The standard D&D mode, plus a work mode, maybe a sleep mode, and some of us might have a gym mode as well. So with each focus mode, you could have 8 different actions, and under those 8 actions, you could have 8 further sub-actions. This brings up your total to an astounding 256 actions. Honestly, at this point, I would just ask you to hire a personal assistant because managing 256 actions mapped to a single button is a full-time job. Personally, I would not recommend anyone to dive into the funky focus realm if you already belong to the tricky tweaker or the functional frenzy camp. The sheer amount of cognitive load that it would take to remember what is where is just so high that it's not worth it. I would rather have the mental peace and reliability of knowing no matter what or where or when I press the action button, it is going to lead me to a certain action. After all, muscle memory is also a thing. But hey, for someone using the bare bones approach, focus modes can be extremely handy. Combining singular actions with focus modes adds a layer of functionality without adding too much complexity into the mix. For example, your action button could open a workout playlist when you're in the gym, or it could be used to silence unknown callers when you're in the office. It retains much of the simplicity and yet adds a layer of certain elegance and functionality to the action button in your existing workflow. In case you're wondering about me, I am on the lower end of the tricky tweaker camp. Out of the 8 options, a few of them open up more options, but most of them serve straight up functionality. I like it this way because it offers a decent trade-off between functionality and customizability. This way, I have quick access to most of the settings that I would need to access in an instance, while also retaining the option to dig deeper into certain settings should the need arise. So there it is. You're now empowered with 4 approaches. Well, technically 6 approaches to use the action button, because the funky focus is more of a wild card and it can be used with any of the other 3 approaches to give you a total of 6 possible approaches. You can play around with the action button a little bit and figure out which camp it is that you belong to. Oh, and the tiny gem of information which I found while researching for this video, here it is. The basic idea is to introduce double tap, triple tap, or even hold functionality into the action button, kind of like the power button. This would add functionality to the action button in such a simple manner that even a complete beginner would not be intimidated by customization. Currently, you have to dive into the whole web of shortcuts, and a complete beginner would just not get into that. The possibilities are there, but this is only wishful thinking because we don't know when or if Apple would ever release something like this. But we can hope. If you watched the video till here, I really hope you got some value out of it. Please show some love as it helps the algorithm help you find me when I upload the next video. Oh, and here are a couple of more videos that you can watch if you're interested in any of the topics. I will see you guys in the next one.